So I am here with David Ross, the host of Catholic Versus. Thanks for coming on the show, David.
Thanks for having me, Nick. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
So, as I've told my listeners and as I've told you, this is an effort to get out of my own way. And you are an incisive interviewer as well as deeply connected with the Roman Catholic Church, which I left. And so I wanted to talk to you and see if you might help me find my blind spots, bias spots, places where I might be obstructing God's work in my life or obstinate or arrogant in some way. The phrase that I hear you use often is ill will. So I'm looking to try and find those areas in an effort to hold true to what my mission is for this film, which is to prove my atheism wrong. So I don't know necessarily where you want to go from there, if anything jumps to your mind or...
Yeah, the first thing I would mention is humility. Just knowing what you are, who you are, and who and what God is, that pretty much would solve all of your problems. And it's not purely an intellectual challenge. It's primarily a challenge of the will, as I always emphasize on my podcast. So you need to face reality, and that can be shocking, it can be humiliating, but it's a necessary step to understand that you are nothing and that God is everything, and that much of what you think is wholesome and normal behavior is actually hurting our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And when we look at his passion and death, you will see that things that you think are cute in your personality are actually damnable sins. Your vanity, your pride, and your selfishness generally. So it sounds very heavy, but once you're able to acknowledge it, it's the only place that we can have true freedom is in reality. And that's the definition of sanity too. So yeah, I do talk a lot about goodwill versus ill will. And as St. Augustine famously said, there are two cities characterized by two loves, love of self unto contempt of God. That's the ill will, and then the goodwill is love of God unto contempt of self. So that's where I would like to start with you.
Okay, how do I respond to that? The scrupulous and overanalyzing and obsessive-compulsive inner Catholic in me very much resonates with the idea that even the perceivably benign transgressions are catastrophic to my salvation. But I don't see to whom I'm transgressing or upon whom. So I think maybe we should start in the other area. I really like what you said when you said that you can only have true freedom in reality. And actually right before I called you up here, I was speaking on the intro of this podcast describing how nihilism is void of a foundation. There's nowhere to put my feet. There is no order amongst the chaos. There is no direction. Good and evil are social constructs. There's no way to navigate the world. And the absurdism sort of wreaks havoc on my mental state as a person. And that's, where this film has really come from. It's therapy. This film is therapy for me.
Yeah, and there's the attraction, you feel the attraction to having a solid foundation, a solid belief system, something real that you can grab a hold of. Is that what you're hinting at?
Absolutely. Yeah, not even hinting. That's exactly what I'm striving for. And I don't have it. Now, I should say I do believe that what I believe is true. I just don't like it. But I also know that you don't know you're right unless you try and prove yourself wrong. So, that's the thrust of this film. And then I also know that I'm a very arrogant and biased person with motives of my own and dishonesty of my own. And so that's where this effort to extirpate them comes from. In your own journey, what were some of those personal hurdles that you had to overcome in order to accept God?
Well, I had to go deeper and deeper into sin and selfishness and atheism, frankly. I had to go deeper and deeper and deeper into it. following the truth as I saw it and living out the logical implications of my absurd atheist worldview, I had to dedicate myself more and more and more. The danger for everyone, Catholic, atheist, and everyone in between, is mediocrity. So we need to dedicate ourselves to our worldview, commit, take the leaps of faith that are required because of the axiomatic assumptions that we're making, be honest and say that, look, this is my assumption. I might be wrong, but I can't pretend that I don't believe it. So I have to be authentic and true to myself. So I have to take the risk. And it's a love story. So just like with any romantic love story, you have to take a risk, you have to be vulnerable, and you have to put yourself in danger. And this is the turning point for every human being. When you make yourself vulnerable and when you step into the dark, then God has a chance to speak to you and to touch you. And that's what happened to me. It's an existential crisis, basically, that you have to be willing to enter into. And we've talked about this in your interview, and you did a good job of articulating it. So I know that you know what I'm talking about. And we have shared many, many common experiences in terms of the absurdity of life and being and nothingness and so on and so forth. So you're not far. You're really not far.
Okay, well, that's the first encouraging word that I've heard in a while. Yeah, so one thing that I'm wary of is the desire to relieve suffering. I'm worried that that might taint my pursuit of truth, because I don't care whether or not I like the belief system, if it's a comfortable piece of clothing to wear. I care if it's true. And I think, that's admirable on the surface until you start bumping into those belief systems that are both true and shitty, whether or not they are true. For example, solipsism. I remember when we were talking in our interview and you expressed how lonely solipsism is. Now, you obviously thought it was true. You weren't lying to yourself, and you weren't believing it because it was comfortable. So does believing in God bring you peace and comfort and happiness?
Yes.
Great. That's makes it all the more appealing to me.
Yeah, for sure. But I didn't know that I was looking for God. I was just following the truth, just like apparently what you're doing. So I was also willing to follow the truth wherever it led, and it led me to a very dark and uncomfortable place. And I wasn't secretly hoping that God would reach out to me. I wasn't secretly hoping that I would psychologically trick myself into believing in God. I wasn't thinking about that. I was just following the truth, in love with the truth, and following my ridiculous axiomatic assumptions to their logical conclusions and charting out that territory. And the fact that it was bleak and horrible and horrifying just made it easier when God did touch me. So it's easy for you on the other side of this equation to look and be cynical and say, well, David had a psychological reaction to pain and he embraced comfort in self-delusion, but that's not what happened. And there's no way for me to convince you of that. And once you have the same experience, your atheist buddies will look at you the way that you're looking at me right now. And so it is, I mean, God does have a sense of humor, and he's enjoying all of the drama. But once you're on my side, you and I will have a connection that transcends words, and we'll have an understanding of these mysteries, and you'll have a family. Right now you don't have a family. You have blackness and just emptiness and absurdity. And you can enjoy that too, but it's much better on my side.
The grass, without a doubt, appears greener. Yeah, that's for damn sure.
Yeah. I mean, I still have problems. I'm still a selfish, vain, and proud individual, so I'm still suffering the consequences of that. It's not like I'm a saint. So you'll have plenty of time. If you enjoy being a sinner, you'll have plenty of time to enjoy being a sinner, even once you do get touched by God. But one of my great fears as I realized that God is real and that religion is something that I have to participate in. It wasn't optional. I had to participate in public worship of God. This was just, again, I was just grabbed by this reality. And part of my fear was that I am going to lose myself. I'm going to lose my personality. I'm going to lose my identity. And this is a really tangible paranoia that gripped me. But as it turns out, that's sort of a misinformation campaign. It's a bunch of lies that are propagated by Satan and his minions to keep you where you are. And once you start to trust God and have a relationship with God, you realize that, and especially once you read the lives of the saints, you realize that these people are unique individuals with a lot of personality, a lot of character, and even a lot of character flaws, you know. You can read the battle between St. Jerome and St. Augustine, for example. There were harsh words exchanged, and you can see these are real people. And they have their character, they have their personality, they've got their likes and dislikes, and but God loves them anyway, as they are, and they're all so unique and special, and so are you. You know, so you don't need to be afraid about losing yourself. And the analogy I always like to use is romantic love. When I met my wife, I was more myself around her than I'd ever been around any other woman. And there are other things, like you talked about peace. I'd never been able to relax around a woman. You know, even if I'd been intimate with her, I was never able to sleep and to really be at peace in bed when we weren't doing hanky-panky. So when I met my future wife, one of the first things I noticed, and she noticed it too, is that we were able to sleep. Like we were just sitting on my veranda, perfectly innocent, but there was that comfort level, that peace that we had. And we're able to be ourselves more authentically, not less. And this is what true love does. It shows you who you are, and it makes you want to give yourself to the other and to be a better person for your beloved. And it's the same thing with religion. So there really is nothing to fear.
That is so beautiful and attractive to me. I'm probably not playing the game that the atheist community wants me to play, where the religious person is the dumb person and we are the smart ones. And it makes me wonder, in the atheist community, have they not experienced, or do they not have the capacity to hunger for those things that you just outlined? Because if you really do understand what you just described, that is what we should be pursuing in this life, is experiences like that, is that foundational romantic love, that ordered universe, this antidote to chaos. And I have never felt that in atheism. There has always been this part of me that felt anemic and dead and sad, but that always butts up against the part of my brain that says, tough shit, it's true. So I'm not playing the role of the good atheist right now. I should insult you just to just to get on good terms with them.
No. But listen, there are many, many people, I'm sure you know some, who are jaded about the opposite sex. This is a reality, and these same people are seeking to fill that void, whether it be through pornography or through one-night stands or through just using people of the opposite sex, but they still are jaded. They still tell themselves intellectually, well, yeah, their body is nice and the pleasure was nice, but that's as far as it goes. The reality is just an ugly Darwinian reality, and these drives and these impulses I have, and those ridiculous images of the perfect family that we see in some corny Christian movies or whatever it is, or Hallmark cards, that's just a lie, and the reality is ugly, and I embrace the reality. And yes, I have the hunger, but it's just a Darwinian mechanism, and it's evolved in me. And yeah, I can satisfy myself with hookers or pornography or whatever it is. And yeah, there's some pleasure in that, but the ultimate reality is very grim and ugly, and life is meaningless. There are people that are that jaded, and those people, if you watch them and you watch them fall in love for the first time and to be vulnerable for whatever reason, these people find themselves transformed, and then they flourish, and the hatred falls away and the anger falls away. That jaded attitude falls away, and they're at peace. You can see that. You can watch the story of these people who are very jaded blossom into human beings, because really that is our human nature, is to be fully alive, and to be fully alive we need to give of ourselves, and we need to love authentically. So you can see examples all around you. You just need to take a look, and you can see both sides of that coin. It's the same thing with religious life. You can see people who were bitter atheists who transformed into fulfilled religious people, and the other way around. Just judge for yourself. Which way do you want to go?
I think the question that I'm going to ask you now is probably going to become a staple throughout this next year. And the question is, what is the difference between you and I, specifically with regards to believing in a God? What is it about you or me that is different, that has placed us on either side of the aisle with this?
Just a willingness to say yes, and the opportunity I've probably had millions of opportunities to say yes, and at a certain point in a certain time, I was able, by the grace of God, to say yes. And by the grace of God, I was able to nurture that small spark of faith into a small flame. And now I'm protecting that small flame of faith and hoping that it will become a raging fire that would consume the whole world. So that's the difference. You are on a different path, and you've already experienced faith. But like myself, I had to fall away. And so it seems with you have to fall away, and you have to explore and discover for yourself the authenticity of your own journey back to God. And so I'm sure you're being given opportunities all day, every day to say yes to God. When the time is right, and when the space is right, and the atmosphere is right, and all the puzzle pieces are there in place, it will click, you'll say yes, and then you'll fall in love, not only with God, but with the grace of God and the faith that you've been given, and you'll guard it and protect it and nurture it and try to build it and grow it and share it, like I'm doing in my small way. And you can look to the saints for a true example, a good example of how to run with it and how to build on it. So there is no difference really between us. It's just our stories unfolded organically and authentically and differently. We are unique. We do have free will, and we can't pretend that this is all scripted. It's not scripted. We really are free. Can we ever understand that freedom? No, we can't. Even in all eternity, we can't understand free will. That's why atheists reject free will, because it is not rational to believe in free will. Not on the surface anyway. So I applaud all those atheists who are hard determinists, because that's really the most rational position to have if you don't have God. But once you take the leap of faith into free will and into God, everything changes. And then it's not so much a chess match as it is a love story and poetry and a dance. So we're not different. I don't think we're different.
I don't ever remember being asked by God or given an opportunity to say yes every day. What am I missing?
Well, I'll ask for God. I can say, Nick, you know that you're nothing. You know that you did not create yourself. So why are you resisting me? Why don't you just give in? Why don't you just thank me for your life and thank me for everything that's good in your life? Because I am the source of everything that's good in your life. So I'm speaking now as God. I'm not claiming to be a divine channel of God, but this is the truth of God, and I'm just sort of presenting it to you to put you on the spot, because this is what God is saying to you, not only through me now in this theatrical and playful way, but through the very mountains and streams and the trees and the sunshine and the birds chirping and everything that's good about life, the blood flowing through your veins, every heartbeat, every breath. You're being asked, God is asking you, Nick, why don't you love me? Why don't you return my love? Why don't you thank me? Why don't you appreciate everything you have? So I think you are being asked. You just need to tune in to that, to be sensitive. And this is the way of the poet, to tune into that and to be aware and to listen.
I don't know what to do with that.
Well, the alternative is to say, well, David, I'm self-existent and I have nothing to worry about. That's the only rational alternative. And that's the alternative that I went with as a solipsist. As my atheism went darker and darker and deeper, I entered into solipsism, which was to say that I am self-existent. I have nothing to worry about. If I'm worried, It's only for my own entertainment. If I seem to be scared of my own shadow, it's only for my own entertainment. That's where atheism took me. Now, if you're more on a nihilistic path, then you're just drowning in a sea of blackness and questions. I've never entered into that space, but I can imagine it's not very pleasant. But, the more rational position, I think, is to say, well, if God is not God, then I am God. I am self-existent, and I have absolutely nothing to worry about.
So I've heard you talk about this proof before that got you out of solipsism, which is, if God is not God, then I am God. And I am not God, therefore God is God. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I just want to clarify, that's not what took me out of solipsism. What took me out of solipsism was just reading René Descartes. I saw that there's a leap of faith which is very small and which is not necessarily being presented as a rational argument. It wasn't a proof. It was just an example of someone who did believe in God, showing me how quickly and easily I could make the leap of faith and how painless it is. And then I started looking at the medieval proofs for the existence of God. And then I started thinking about solipsism and rational ways to prove using solipsism that if God is not God, then I am God. Because if I'm wrong when I say that I'm not God, then I'm God, and God cannot be wrong, and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to emphasize that the rational component comes afterwards. It's an afterthought. Once you're in the privileged position of being a monotheist, then you can think these things through a lot more clearly. But in the moment, it's more of an existential leap onto the comfort of monotheism. As you mentioned, actually, in my interview of you on my podcast, you suspected that probably it was based on comfort rather than on pure reason. And you're absolutely right, because it's an existential trip.
And then it was just buttressed by the syllogisms post.
Yeah. The sort of slogan of the Middle Ages in Christendom is faith seeking understanding, right? It's not understanding seeking faith, which is why I think that you have faith already and you're just sort of building up the nerve or the courage to submit to your beloved. I think you do love God. I think you know that God exists. I think you're just nervous about getting into bed with him, so to speak. There's a bit of nervousness there and trepidation, and rightfully so.
Yeah, performance anxiety, I get it.
Luckily, you're the woman in this analogy, so my advice to you is to just be cute and charming and don't say a lot. Flutter your eyes and just be coy.
That's amazing. So I want to circle back a couple of minutes ago, because it got my heart rate up, which I have to be honest. That's the purpose of this whole thing is, you were demonstrating what God is saying to me at this time, and I started to get nervous. So maybe you could reiterate, is there something right now that I could say or do that would flip the switch?
I don't know. I was very, very, very desperate when I caved in, when I said uncle. So I don't know how desperate you are in your heart of hearts. I think it's going to come in the darkness of a long night, tossing and turning and being unable to sleep. And I was in bed when I converted, and I was beside my wife, and she had no idea what I was going through existentially. And I think it's at night when you're alone. I don't think it's when you're broadcasting a podcast that you have these moments, really. Honestly, I'm not being facetious. I really do think that it is a very intimate conversation where you make space for God, and then he speaks, and then you listen to him. So I think it's going to come maybe upon reflection, maybe with a minor tragedy in your life, something that just sobers you up. And one of the images that I really like to use is the Titanic. There were many people that were drunk and eating and in the first class lounge. They were having a great time. And no matter how many people warned them, no matter how serious the warnings were from the stewards of the captain, they just went on. Many of them went on with their revelry and their enjoyment of life. And so I think there's something to be said for the distracting component of pleasure and of the social component. I mean, if there were just one person alone in the quiet of their cabin and the captain's steward came to warn them, I think that there would be a different sort of atmosphere for that message to come across. But when you're in that lounge and the music is playing on and there are people on the dance floor around you swirling around rhythmically and laughing and joking, it's really, really hard to take the message seriously. So this is one of the sort of common features of religious life is silence, solitude, a hatred of conversation, a hatred of the world generally, a hatred of all the distractions and all the pleasures of the world. And Jesus himself talked about this. He talked about in the day of Noah how people were distracted by the marriages, by the festivities, by the trading and the selling and the hustle and bustle of a beautiful, beautiful, active life. Among all these goods, everything is good. The sunshine is good. The money that you're making is good. A beautiful woman that you're marrying is good. Everything is good. But they're just missing that silence, just missing that quiet. And Noah was able to get the message, and he was able to at least attempt to warn those who were enjoying life, but only 8 people made it onto the ark. So it's a very sobering idea, this idea that we need to be alone, we need to cherish silence, and we need to take seriously these questions. Because otherwise you're going to get sucked into the fun and the pleasure and the business, the busyness of life. It's going on all around you. It's very dangerous.
So I may have dodged a bullet there. I don't have to confess my undying love to God on this podcast. On episode 1. It'd be a very short series there.
Yeah. God loves an ark just as much as you do.
That is so good to hear, because I'm really trying to make this an interesting film to watch. I just to reflect on the desperation aspect.
Yeah.
I'm pretty fucking close. I'm making this film out of a place of desperation. I don't know that I could move forward in my life productively, peacefully, with any sort of health mentally, if I don't make this film first and answer these questions. I just sort of see everything unraveling, and that's where this film is really coming from at this time. The silence aspect, I think, is interesting. This is one of the things that I wanted to do in this film, was to do like an extended fast from food and kind of go off into the wilderness and just be quiet. And I think that in general, just lowering the basal volume of distraction might be helpful. But something my sister has told me before, which rings very true, she's a therapist. She said, your mind is like a bad neighborhood. Don't go walking alone at night. And I strongly resonate with that as well. So trying to strike the balance between silence and drowning out the screaming that's going on in my own head is something that I have yet to figure out.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And I just read a quote recently by a saint. I don't remember the quote. I don't remember the saint, but it had something to do with sanctity and busyness. If you're not busy, you can't be a saint. So there's something about activity. You need to be active. You need to be goal-oriented. You need to be directed. And I think there's some famous saying about devil loves idle hands or an idle mind or something like that. So yeah, we definitely need to be cautious. But what I was talking about was more of the passive silence, those long nights where you should be sleeping, but you're just kept awake by the turmoil of your struggle on this journey. And so that is not something that you're seeking. It's something that's unavoidably foisted upon you by this inner tension of your journey. So there is a little bit of a difference there.
Yeah. Okay. No, I understand the distinction a little bit better now. But trying to stay as close on topic as I can here, with sort of character flaws that might preclude me from partaking in truth and objective reality. One of the first things you said was humility. Actually, that was like the very first thing that you said on this podcast was humility.
Yeah.
And so a really great way to quit smoking is to go around to everybody that you know who respects you ever and tell them that day, hey guys, I just stopped smoking cold turkey. Every single person, go tell them. Because then you've just created an ego that's, if anyone sees you with a cigarette in your hand, all of a sudden you've transgressed against this. And I think, for the last however many years, I've kind of gone around to telling everyone like, hey, I'm an atheist, I'm a contrarian, I'm smarter than you are, and and now I'm in this position where I can feel that internal battle saying, don't let go, because I don't know, I'm whatever it's called when you're humiliated, when you're embarrassed in that way. There's something deeper than that I feel raging against this effort and trying to poison it.
Yeah. It's your identity. It's who you are. It's who people think you are. And there will be a lot of resistance from people that think they know who and what you are, right?
Yeah, and so I think maybe another purpose of this podcast is going to be to just tell everyone I'm trying to disprove atheism. That is my goal, and just keep saying it over and over again until that piece of me, that big piece of me, starts to relinquish control and say, it's okay, you can take and I don't think I'm going to get any shit for it. I think there's going to be sort of maybe some implicit I told you so's from mother, which might honestly be the biggest form of trepidation that I have, which is just that by walking away from the church, I walked away from my connection with my mom. And I think by returning to the church, or to God in general, I don't know that I could bear the I told you so. And it's probably unfair of me to assume that that's what it would be. I think that she would just rejoice and be the happiest mom alive, if I'm being honest about it. But there is a part of me that's just waiting for everyone to say, I told you so. And for some reason, that's the most terrifying and unbearable thing for me, which I guess just tells you how conceited I am.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I admire your courage to swim upstream like this. It definitely is not easy. But on the other hand, this is what people admire most, is the individual, someone with character. And in a way, society admires the rebel that will stand up, be the only one to stand up and say, well, this is what I believe. And we don't need to agree with that person, but we will usually admire that person. If they conduct themselves in a way that is dignified, we'll admire them and we can be inspired by them. So I think you're going to gather a lot of admiration, and that's not the primary reason that you should be doing this, but it is one of the side benefits of being authentic, is that people recognize it. Even if it's begrudgingly, even if they weren't able to say it to your face for the first little while because it was just hard for them to be humble, So if you want to think of yourself as sort of setting an example for those around you who suffer from the same conceit and the same pride and the same selfishness and the same tendency to be people pleasers or whatever you want to call it, we're all prone to that. I'm just listening now to a lecture about a young Irish actress who, through the course of events, ended up becoming religious, becoming a nun. And she carried with her all of her vanity, all of her pride, and all of her attention-seeking into the monastery for the first couple of years. And it took many, many months and a few years for her to change and to transform. But those around her, some were naysayers and said that it's never going to work. And others said, in spite of these worldly ways, I see a potential and I see growth. And so I'm going to nurture and support this young girl as she transforms. And she did transform, So I think it's the same thing with you. You can listen to the naysayers, or you can listen to those who love and support you. And in the quiet times of your life, you'll be able to make that distinction. Which camp really loves me more? Not based on what they say, but just based on that intuition that you have deep down in your heart. Which one loves me more? Is it my mother, or is it that friend that I've always admired so much, but which they themselves are suffering from the very things in my own character that I want to distance myself from? And it's not to place your mother above that person. They're both infinite in their dignity, but you know in your heart of hearts which one wants what's best for you and which one is the better example to follow. And you, of course, your mother has her own flaws and her own weaknesses, but we're all a mixed bag. But when it comes down to that sort of basic distinction, I think you're able to see which way you want to go.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think another aspect of this that I bristle at is, and it could just be projection, but Hitch used the phrase privileged knowledge. And I think that's kind of why I get mad at religious people or cult members in general, people who have that sort of elitism, even though they might be in the minority or sort of off in the weeds with some particular belief system. I do feel like I get that, like, oh, you'll come around. And for some reason I can't describe how much that frustrates me. Like, they've been given the pamphlet and I just like didn't show up that day and didn't get the pamphlet.
Yeah.
And
yeah. No, you're right. You're right to recoil at that. That's just pride and that's vanity that you're recoiling at. And you're right. It's ugliness. It's sin. So you need to make that distinction between the baby and the bathwater and between God, who's perfect, and humans who are imperfect. That's why I made pains to mention that your mother is not perfect, because you might be tempted to think that she is perfect in some ways, just as her child, not because she's religious, but just as her child.
Right.
So we need to be humble, not only about ourselves, but we need to be humble about every human that ever lived, with the exception, of course, of our Lord and Our Lady. But all of Our Lady's graces came not by her merits, but through the merits of Jesus Christ, who is God. So there is that abyss that cannot be traversed, that great gulf between God and not God. And so that keeps you humble. That keeps you humble not only with respect to your own frailty, but with respect to the frailty of everyone else that you'll ever meet in human form. So it's very important, I think, to keep that in mind too.
Yeah, the phrase that I like is God's bleed. God's with a lowercase g and an s. And that is that anyone that you ever worship, they bleed, they have scars. And it's usually a very traumatic thing when you figure that out for the first time. One last question for you.
Sure.
Do you think that this question is simple?
Which question?
The question of the existence of God.
Yeah, I think it is simple. Yeah, I think it's very simple. It's too simple. That's the challenge of it. The analogy I like to use is the fish in water. He's swimming around in the water. He's breathing the water. He's looking through the water. He's composed at least 70% of water himself. And what's all this talk of water? He wants to go on a quest to find the water. And it's just too simple. It's too obvious. It's hiding in plain sight. It's the same thing with God. So that's my perspective. I don't know if that's the answer you wanted, but that's my answer.
It's a very valid answer. Obviously, I'm the fish looking around saying, what the hell is water? But it's perfectly valid, and it's just a data point. I think that's another question I'm going to be asking people in addition to what's different about you and I is, is this a simple question? Because you can walk into a library and go to the philosophy and religion section and just be overwhelmed. And if you start alphabetically and you just pick up a book, open it up, read it, you'll be convinced of one thing, only to be deconvinced by the next book, and so on and so forth until you get to the end. And then the librarian pushes up a cart of all the books that had already been checked out and adds those to the shelf. And it's overwhelming. And so part of me wonders, do I have to have 100 lifetimes to figure this out? Or, in your analogy, do I just need to kind of have that realization that, oh, hey, I'm swimming in it. Do you have anything else you want to add or expound on?
Yeah, I would just say that I'm praying for you. I love you. I respect you. And I'm not worried about you. So I think I may have mentioned to you last time that you're outnumbered because you're one person, and I'm one person. So it seems like David versus Nick, but in reality, your guardian angel and my guardian angel are also both Catholic. So it's 3 against 1, in this little dialogue that we're having. And it gives me a lot of confidence that I don't need to lay awake at night worrying about you and your salvation. And it's the same thing with those around you. There's so many people that love you and that want what's best for you. And the fact that you have enemies, you really do have enemies that want you to suffer for all eternity in hell, that fact and that reality is scary, but it can only really hurt you if you deny the reality of hell and deny the reality of Satan. And from what you've told me in previous talks, I know that you fear hell. I know that you know that if hell is real, you will make a beeline to God and that you will seek salvation ultimately, because no one is going to enjoy hell. And those rock and roll stars who sing about the party in hell, they're lying, they're deceived, and deep down, you know they're wrong, and you've had a glimpse of hell. And I'm just hoping you'll get a glimpse of heaven, because I don't spend a lot of time worrying about hell, but I do remind myself daily that it is real and that I can go there. Even though I'm a believer, I can still be selfish and I can still end up in hell. So I just wanted, as a final thought, I just wanted to mention to you that the battle is already won. We know the outcome. Jesus Christ won the battle on the cross, and it's not difficult to put yourself in the winning camp once you realize that ultimate reality is these two cities, the city of God and the city of man, and the choice is clear, but you just need to have your eyes opened to the reality, and then you'll make that very clear and firm stance, and you'll pledge your allegiance to Jesus Christ, and then you'll be back home, and you'll feel at home too. So I just want to reassure you with that imagery.
I can't express enough how much I long for that and how much it means to hear somebody say, "I'm not worried about you," because I feel I'm in constant terror. So that's great to know that you're not, and I reciprocate that love and appreciation, despite our absolute bipolar disagreements on everything. The fact that we can come together and have this conversation is very meaningful to me. So I'm really grateful for that, David. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's nice. I'm really glad you reached out to me. And like I said, I'm thinking about you. I'm praying for you. And I see a happy outcome at the end of all this. I'm curious to see in 1 year, if you talk to me again, how you will have changed. So it's very exciting. And I'm proud of you. And thank you.
Thanks, David.
If you like your worldview, if you think it's swell, if you got some questions, ask me and I'll tell. All you got to do is ask. All you got to do is